10 guys to stash before week 8. This is Beat the Waiver Wire. The first guy we're going to be talking about here, you can see on your screen, is Kendre Miller. So obviously he's been carving out a little bit bigger role for himself. You can see the snap shares starting to creep up into the high 30s. And I think this one is important because I think at any day now we could see Alvin Kamara get traded, right? And I know they had the report that he's probably not going to get traded or that he wants to stay in New Orleans, but it seems just like a 30-year-old running back that could be a great trade piece for a contending team. And to have him hang around, I don't know is in the best interest of the organization. So if that does happen, Kendre Miller immediately would become one of the hottest waiver wire claims.
Yeah, and especially, too, if you have Kamara, you could back your way into 2 starting running backs. And I think, Kamara is obviously in that, I've been with his team forever. I'm getting older. I love New Orleans. But I don't know, man, if Kansas City comes calling and he has a chance to make a Super Bowl run with Patrick Mahomes, I think it just makes too much sense for both parties. It has been nice to see Kendre get off to a good start this year. We've talked about him ad nauseum over the years, just how Dennis Allen just hated him. So it is good to see that the talent is kind of finally shining through, but we're still about 3 weeks away from the deadline. But, my opinion on that is there's no reason for teams to necessarily wait until the 11th hour.
Yeah, definitely. The other thing about that's kind of wild about something you said is you said we've been talking about him forever at nauseum or whatever, because Dennis Allen has hated him, but he's still only 23 years old, right? Like he's literally younger than RJ Harvey. So, there's still some talent here. And I definitely think that, if Kamara does get moved, that this is somebody you're going to want.
Next guy up, Isaiah Davis. So Breece Hall is a free agent after this year, and the Jets are kind of a dumpster fire. Like I mentioned with Kendre Miller, we are still 3 weeks out from the trade deadline, but there's a good chance that we see Breece Hall get moved. And, we talked about this with Kamara as well. I think the Chiefs could make a lot of sense for him. And, it's not like this new coaching regime was all over Breece Hall this offseason, right? We kept hearing about this 3-headed backfield, the committee approach. All these guys are great. And now we have Braylon Allen on IR for the season. So it's not like Isaiah Davis is some, monster prospect waiting in the wings. He was a 5th round pick from South Dakota State. He's pretty much done nothing this entire season. But, if Hall is to get moved, he's going to back his way into a pretty decent sized role for this team.
And obviously same situation here as with Kendre, although we don't necessarily know as clearly that Isaiah Davis would be good. This offense is horrible, and Justin Fields just continues to look worse and worse week over week. So that's why we're talking about Isaiah Davis second here, right? I think even if you add Miller and just keep him on your team, you have somebody that you theoretically could throw into your flex spot as a desperation play. He scored some touchdowns. He actually had double-digit carries 2 weeks ago. So Isaiah Davis is not that guy, right? I mean, you really have to have a Breece Hall trade for him to really become prominent. But, similarly to what you said with Kamara, if you have Breece Hall and you add him, there's a situation where you end up with two starters. It does seem also like Breece Hall is a lot more likely to get traded than Kamara. So, there is that element too, where the chance of Isaiah Davis hitting is quite a bit higher than Kendre Miller. So just food for thought on that. I would be trying to pick up Isaiah Davis for sure. I picked him up in our Dynasty League, just as a speculative add. And, maybe somebody down the stretch needs a running back and he's kind of the only game in town left or something like that. But so just foreshadowing, looking forward on Isaiah Davis, I think it's a good idea to get him onto your rosters if you have space. Next guy up is Jalen Coker. So it finally looks like he's going to make his debut this week in week 7. So he practiced in full yesterday, and I would anticipate that he is going to get out there and play. And Bryce Young has been looking better the last couple weeks than he did early. It literally looked like he might get benched again. And then now it's like, when he's been needing to make plays, he kind of has been figuring it out. And they just won 2 games as well. So they're 3-3. And I'm hopeful for Coker. I mean, they just don't have a second option in this offense really behind Tet. Leggett, I guess, had a solid game last week. But, Sanders has been out with injury and he hasn't been doing anything. And there's been really nobody clear behind Tet. And I think Coker could be that guy. I know maybe you're a little bit more hesitant to put your money behind the 7th round pick than the 1st round pick. But anyways, I think Coker is somebody that should definitely be added, because if he goes off or even has a solid game, he's going to be at the top of everybody's waiver wire column to start the week next week.
And Bryce throws the ball a ton. They're top 10 in pass attempts. A lot of that's just out of necessity too, because this defense is terrible. So I think, we saw the flashes last season, right? And he kind of gained a little bit of a cult following. So this is the type of guy that, I don't necessarily know plug and play this week against the New York Jets, but you can also make the case that, if Sauce is going to be all over Tet, then, maybe he can have a little bit of runway. So this is someone that I think, has a chance to make a decent impact that's pretty much free at this point.
Yeah, and I do like that he can be used around the formation too, in the slot and outside. Tet's obviously going to be playing the X, but, he can play Z, he can play in the slot. So I do like Jalen Coker quite a bit. I'm hopeful here, cautiously optimistic, but definitely add him to your teams. And he's still on IR, right? So you can pick him up, throw him on IR until the end of the week, and then activate him if that helps with roster flexibility in any way.
Next guy up, Darius Slayton. So there's a good chance that he ends up missing this week, so you can throw him into your IR spot. So right now, obviously, New York Giants are very thin at the wide receiver position. We saw Wandale have a really nice game, but I think really the most encouraging sign is how fantastic Jackson Dart has looked. So if Slayton comes back and he is, the 1A or the 1B in this offense, he's going to get a decent amount of runway. And we've seen over the course of his career, and specifically last season, when, he does have that chance to step up when, Neighbors was out, he has made quite a bit of impact, and, he's on the field a ton. So this is somebody that, 27% rostership seems way too low, in my opinion. However, there is a good chance that New York ends up trading for a wide receiver. But in case that doesn't happen, he's someone that, can have a lot of value through the rest of the season.
Yeah, and I think, too, if he misses this week, right, he didn't show up on a lot of waiver wires because waiver wire columns this week because he was out, and then it still looks like he's going to be out. But if we get early news or anything over the weekend that says, he might be looking to play next week, that type of news, he's going to show up again on a lot of waiver wire columns, because like you said, it's just the position's so thin for the Giants. And, as much as we like Wandale, I think we can all acknowledge that he's not exactly an NFL number one wide receiver. So Slayton is going to have a role down the stretch here and can gain quite a bit of targets, right? You see that game where he got hurt. He already had 6 targets. I know he played 75% of the snaps, but, he got hurt in the fourth quarter, could have possibly racked up some more points there at the end of the game. And they were losing that game too. So I do think he could have had a much better game than that. And so Slayton, somebody I've always been partial to. I know I was pushing him at the deadline last year, hoping he was going to go to Tampa Bay or something like that. But I think there's a good opportunity for him here over the second half. Next guy up is Elic Ayomanor. I feel like he's turning into a staple on this show, and I'm really hoping he graduates this week with the Calvin Ridley injury. I do think Ridley's going to miss some time. He hasn't been ruled out officially yet, but Elic, I think if he steps up into the number one role, you see him play 93% of the snaps. Last week, he was definitely the number one in terms of routes run, all that type of stuff. Doesn't translate into a lot of production when you have Cam Ward, who can't really get the ball out, behind a terrible offensive line. And I'm really starting to question whether or not Cam Ward is it. But I guess that's why we don't judge rookies after 6 games. So, Elic, I do think, though, for this coming week, definitely has an opportunity here to be solid without Calvin Ridley. But then also you have that week 10 bye looming in the next couple of weeks. And we do like to talk about rookies coming out of their bye weeks and getting more established in their offenses. So I do have hope that even after that and down the second half of the year that he can be productive. Cam Ward starts to figure it out a little bit more, can get the ball out, stop getting sacked so much. And that will really help Elic from a fantasy perspective.
Yeah, and the reason we wanted to add him to this is his rostership has been dropping. And so, there is that opportunity for him when he steps into the number one role. And I think, a lot of times we see teams after a coach has been fired, they kind of come out firing and maybe look a little bit better. So there is an opportunity for that to happen. But I think more importantly for Tennessee, they do want to get a good look at this guy as to, whether or not they want to build around him as a 1, as a 2, as a 3 for the future. So a guy that we really liked, he was pretty much out targeting Ridley the first few weeks. And more importantly, he's on the field a ton. So again, if somebody has dropped him, I think it is worth picking him up. Next guy up, Rashod Bateman. So I personally kept trying to make Bateman a thing for the first 3 years of his career. He was awesome in college. He was a late first round pick. Then I finally gave up on him last year, and he ended up finishing as the wide receiver 34, which isn't great, but he did show some flashes, and the team did sign him to an extension. He's only had one decent game this year, why ownership is so low. But the reason behind this is, he is in his bye week, and coming out of the bye, this isn't necessarily going to be the typical Ravens team. Like, their defense is so horrible that Lamar is probably just going to have to throw the ball a ton. And also Lamar is, coming off a hamstring injury, so maybe he doesn't run quite as much. So again, this is kind of a deeper league guy, not someone that I'm super fond of, but someone that I think should be on your radar because they do get Chicago in week 8, and that defense is not good. So he's someone that can be a desperation plug and play because there are a ton of teams on bye next week.
Yeah, and then it gets followed up by Miami too, right? So, I could definitely see him showing up on waiver columns for Lamar's return, Chicago and Miami, right? And even if you only have him for those 2 weeks, just to check in on if he is playing well at that point, right? And maybe can keep it rolling. But yeah, I think Bateman is an overall solid player. It's just unfortunately not super involved. I mean, if Zay Flowers can't get involved at the rate we want, it's hard to kind of count on Bateman as well. But overall, good player to stash too, because if Flowers does get hurt, he showed last year he can step right into that role and be productive too. So it's one of those rare handcuffs, I guess, at wide receiver. Not really, because Zay Flowers isn't like somebody you'd want to go out of your way to handcuff. That would be like handcuffing J.K. Dobbins. It's like, are we gonna handcuff our running back 2 or whatever.
Next guy up, Luther Burden. So a player that, we really like a lot. And we did see a little bit of a flash last week with that big play. So we have seen his snap percentage, unfortunately was still only 23%, but he did have the highest route run rate of the season at 39%. And, DJ Moore is dealing with some weird injury right now, and we don't necessarily know the status. We're recording this Thursday morning. So if DJ Moore was to miss any time, he's going to step into a big role. And again, this was Ben Johnson's guy that he hand selected in the second round. And if you want to look at his, if you want to make the case for Amon-Ra St. Brown's rookie year, and how he was kind of a ghost the first half, and Ben Johnson was the passing game coordinator at the time, and he broke out. That's kind of there as well. But I think this kind of has more to do with, DJ Moore, unfortunately. And if Burden does end up carving out more of a role, or DJ Moore does get moved, which, Chicago's winning, so I don't necessarily, think that's going to be the case. However, this is a very talented player on an ascending offense, so he's definitely someone that should be higher than 28%.
Yeah, and the other thing is DJ Moore got hurt last week. He was overnight in the hospital after the game. They're listing it as a groin, but if you look it up, it's not exactly a groin. So he's day-to-day, but he might still miss the game. So if he does, I think against the Saints, that's a pretty good spot for Burden to possibly have his breakout game if he's going to operate as the number 2. So I'm excited and looking for him to have a big role this week if DJ Moore ends up sitting. Next guy up is Jayden Higgins. So another guy that we've kind of been beating the drum on. He's coming off his bye week this week and gets Seattle. So, another one of those cases where it's a rookie out of a bye. And I just have to be really hopeful here that his role expands, because it still was something where we only saw this last week where he broke 50% snap share. And this is somebody that we thought was going to be out there a ton, that we thought was going to take on a big role as the number 2 in the offense. And that just hasn't come to fruition yet, but he is still super talented. And if this week is the week where he gets up into the 70 plus snap percentage and ends up with 5-6 targets, that's going to be somebody that definitely shows up on your waiver wires everywhere.
And if he does see that snap percentage against Seattle, he could be, a potential start against San Francisco the following week. They're going to be decimated on defense. We talked about how many buys there are that week. So, and again, this offense hasn't exactly been humming the first quarter of the season. So I think, the coach and OC have a chance to kind of look around and see what changes they can make. And I really think Higgins being on the field, because he's looked good in his limited sample size.
Yeah, definitely. And it's like, I hope they can get Nico Collins going too, because Nico's been terrible too. Yeah. I think the passing game just overall needs to pick it up. And I think that can be, or that Higgins can be a huge piece of that coming out of the bye week. So like you said, hopefully the coaching staff figured it out and that we see a much better offense on display in Seattle this week.
Next I have Jack Bech, obviously for our deeper league audience, but his snap percentage has been going up each week, and Deontay Thornton's has been kind of free falling, and Bech was at an 80% route share last week, which is great. He was a second round pick by the Raiders, a player a lot of scouts really loved, and I think the Raiders kind of want to see what they have in him. He's never been a high percentage or possession guy in college, but he was a really nice player coming out of TCU. And I think the biggest thing is, this week we've seen a lot of trade rumors heat up with Jacoby Myers, and, Jacoby had requested a trade before the season anyways. And I do think there's a legitimate possibility that he's moved to Pittsburgh or the Giants or whatever. So if that happens, then, Bech is going to get a lot of runway. And, with Bowers coming back after their bye, hopefully, he's probably not going to have a crazy target share, but he's going to be on the field a ton. So, someone that, again, very deep league stash, but, I think could grow into a pretty decent role here. Yeah, however, definitely. Geno's been horrible.
Yeah, Geno obviously has been so brutal. But if Geno does clean it up a little bit, maybe the bye week is what he needs to clean up his interceptions. But Bech is somebody that we liked as a prospect too. Early offseason type of stuff. We were talking about Bech as somebody that we were hoping landed in a good spot. And unfortunately that was with the Raiders, but 75% snap share is something that isn't anything to sneeze at. So if his role is going to continue to grow, this is somebody that I think could be interesting as we get further and further into the season. Next guy up is Cade Otton. So you can see he played 100% of the snaps last week. I don't know how many times I've ever seen that, but that's obviously by necessity. Yeah, I mean, he's out there 90% of the time. He's out there all the time. But there's no game in town here. If Mike Evans comes back, maybe this all, will cool the jets a little bit on Cade Otton. But we did see him perform very well last year when Evans and Godwin were both out. And the fact that they're both going to be out and Ibuka is going to be out, maybe Evans is there, but I do think that there's a role here for Otton. He led the team in targets last week, and Ibuka played for the first quarter of that game. And so I do think Detroit, New Orleans, both should be games where they're throwing a lot. Maybe not New Orleans so much in the second half, but hopefully he's part of the let's get up big in the first half. So overall, I think Otton is a pretty good add if you're hurting at tight end. I think over the next 2 weeks that he's likely to be a top 10 tight end. So if you've been rolling like Juwan Johnson, I think this is a great guy to pivot to at this point.
Yeah, isn't fantasy just wild? I mean, last year we see him be the number one when Evans, Godwin, and McMillan are out. And then this offseason they added Ibuka, and it's like, okay, well, Otton is going to be the number 5 or really the number 6 behind the running backs. And now here we are where he's potentially stepping into the number 1 role. And like you mentioned, we've seen him be very productive. And he's one of those guys when, he has the ball in his hands and he's catching passes. He looks really good. I think he's a really solid player. And, in our league, where I have Bowers, unfortunately still injured, I'm definitely planning to play him this week, if Evans does miss. So just follow those reports. Unfortunately, they are playing on Monday night, so it makes it a little bit trickier. But again, Ibuka is definitely not definitely, but probably won't be back next week either. So someone you can plug into your lineups for a couple weeks. Next team up is the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. So next week, as far as beating the waiver wire for defenses, is just kind of brutal. With the Bucs, they are playing the Saints in week 8. And in the beginning of the season, we kind of played pick on the Saints for these type of shows, but the Saints have been looking a little better. But I will say that the thing about Tampa
quarterback Rattler,
maybe it is interesting.
He's been playing pretty well.
Yeah. And it's are we going to see Shuck at some point? Are we going to get, a first round quarterback pick from them next year? Probably, but who knows? But with Tampa Bay, we know they're an aggressive defense and sacks are a big part of their game, which is, the easiest way to rack up yardage on a team that's probably not going to score a lot of touchdowns, if any.
Yeah, definitely.
Especially if they trade Chris Olave and,
and Kamara. Yeah. If in 2 weeks they don't have their players, that would be even more enticing for the Buccaneers. But yeah, in week 8, just a brutal week. And like you mentioned about the Bucs, they get sacks, against San Francisco, Jets, Philly, Houston. They're going to be able to get sacks against New Orleans. The offensive line there isn't the greatest. And so they absolutely can get after the quarterback. Now, are they going to be over the top? Unless they score a touchdown, probably not. And they could be susceptible to giving up 350 yards, that type of thing. But overall, I do think that this was the best defense available in more than half the leagues for that week. I mean, the number of teams on bye just crushes your options at defense. So this is a unique week, I feel like, for the defense position at for Beat the Waiver Wire. All right, with that, thank you guys so much for watching. We look forward to talking to you in the next one.